Yokoso owashitare. Welcome back. Today's story is actually somewhat similar to the last one in that it features human sacrifice, a monkey god, and a hero, but it also has enough different about it that it is completely a new story and not just a different version of the previous one. It is a story that still has that classic folktale quality about it that you will no doubt pick up on. So, if you like Japanese history, Japanese literature, folktale, storytelling, or just storytelling in general, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel because there are plenty more stories where this one came from. And with all of that being said, let's get into the story. Once upon a time, imawa mukashi. There was a wandering Buddhist priest who went about the country making his living as wandering monks do, begging for food, performing prayers, and doing Buddhist rituals, things of that nature. And one day, this priest's travels led him to the province of Hida. Specifically, he found himself walking a very lonely path in the mountains that only seemed to go deeper and deeper into its rocky shadows. Eventually, this priest went so deep into the wilds that he got lost and couldn't remember where the path was. After wandering for a bit, he found what looked like a new path, but it was so slight and faint that he couldn't be sure. But with really no other option, he decided to follow it and see if it would lead him to civilization. After going along this path, however, cutting through the fallen leaves that had littered the ground, the path led him to a sheer cliff with a single, very large waterfall that seemed to hang from the rock like a set of blinds. Looking at this cliff, the priest couldn't see any passes through it, and it was far too high and steep to try and climb, which meant that it was a dead end. So, this priest turned around to head back the other way he came, but when he looked, he realized he couldn't make out the faint path that he had used to get here, and realized that he was now completely lost. With no other options and being tired and miserable, this priest sat on the ground and began praying for the Buddha to save him, when, all of a sudden, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him, and turning towards the sound, he saw a man carrying a large pack on his back and wearing a conical straw hat. Now this was a huge relief for the priest, as it was more than likely that this man knew the area, and just as this priest was about to ask this man the way out, the man met eyes with the priest, and suddenly seemed to become nervous. This didn't stop the priest from standing up and, while walking toward the stranger, asking him, "Good sir, where are you coming from, and where are you going to? Do you know the way out of this place?" But the man simply turned his face away, and without answering a single word, made his way over to the waterfall, and with no hesitation, leaped into it and disappeared. Now this terrified the priest, who instantly thought that this man was no man at all, but rather an oni, or a demon, that had used some sort of magic to vanish into thin air. Though given the nature of oni, it likely was going to come back and turn the priest into dinner. So, to make a bad situation worse, not only did this priest not know where to go, but he was sure he was about to be eaten in the next few moments, and he thought to himself, "I don't see any way out of this." That being the case, instead of getting eaten alive by this oni, I'll just follow his example and throw myself into this waterfall and drown. That way, if it comes back to eat me, at least I won't be alive for it. And, so determining, the priest then made his way over to the waterfall, and saying one final prayer to the Buddha, requesting for his aid in the next life, the priest leapt into the waterfall. But instead of being beaten down by the force of water and plunged into the depths of the pool underneath it and drowned, the priest went right through it. And this waterfall, it turned out to only be as thick as a single layer of blinds, and he fell on some dry ground on the other side. And then, taking a second to realize that he wasn't drowning, the priest looked around and saw a narrow pathway leading from where he was into this cliff face, into this mountain. Curious, he began following it, and it didn't take long before he came out of a small tunnel and upon a large village with lots and lots of houses. Now this was a huge relief for the priest, who just moments ago was worried that he was going to die alone in the wilds or get eaten alive by an oni. But now with civilization in front of him, and all those fears melted away, and he began walking in the direction of this hidden village. He had only gone a short distance, though, when he noticed a couple of men now running in his direction. One of which was the man he had seen earlier, who had now relieved himself of the pack he was carrying. But following close behind this man was another who was dressed in very nice light blue garb. Now, I'm not sure what all the symbolism behind this color was. Heian period aristocrats had very well-defined associations between color, rank, and all sorts of ideas. But I'm pretty sure the idea is that this man's colored garb indicated that he was fairly well off, definitely not a member of the high nobility of the capital, but certainly powerful out in the provinces. Anyway, it didn't take long before both of these men made it to the priest, and no sooner had they reached him when they each grabbed one of his arms and began pulling him towards the village. Startled, the priest immediately reacted with a surprised, "What are you doing?" To which the well-dressed man simply responded with an intense, "Please sir, come to my home." And he and the other man very firmly led this priest deeper into the village. And as they went, other villagers began running out of their houses towards these three men. They gathered around them and began clinging to whatever part of this priest they could get their hands on and repeated the refrain, "Please sir, come to my home." Soon, a whole crowd of people had gathered around the priest, all begging him to come stay with them, and it got so chaotic and unruly that their progress came to a halt. Now, of course, the priest was terrified, and the moment he started to wonder what they were going to do to him, he heard a voice from the crowd shout, Come now, let's not be so rash about this. Let's take him to the village head and have him decide." This managed to quiet the crowd, who all agreed with one accord, and then they shunted this priest, who could barely believe all of this was actually happening, through the village until they came to a very large house. From this house, out hobbled a man, clearly well stricken in years, but with a weighty presence about him, who looked to the crowd and asked, "What's all this commotion for?" At this, the first man, who had been outside the waterfall with the priest, stepped forward and told this village chief, motioning towards the man in light blue, "I have brought this priest from the land of Japan, and wish to turn him over to this man here." To which the chief replied, "Well, there's not much of a debate here. He should indeed go to him then." Thus saying, the people brought the priest before this man in light blue, and all of the rest of the villagers promptly left for their homes. With the debate now settled, the priest was once again led by the pack-man and the man in light blue, and they began making their way through the village, and the whole way the priest could only think to himself, "Oh no, these people are all Oni, and they were just now debating which of them was going to have the privilege of taking me home and eating me. That's what will happen as soon as we arrive at this man's house. And they don't consider this place to be part of Japan either. How far away am I from home?" And with all these thoughts running frantically through his mind, he began weeping in dreadful anticipation. But as soon as this priest's tears began flowing, the man in light blue turned to him with a confused look on his face and said, "Sir, please don't misunderstand us. This place you now find yourself in is a wonderfully happy place. I fully intend to see that your needs and wants are absolutely taken care of with no cause for concern." And thus saying, they arrived at a house. Very clearly, the house of this man in light blue. And while not as big as that of the village chiefs, this house was very well made, with lots of men and women servants who had clearly been eagerly awaiting their arrival and had made a huge joyful bliss over them when they arrived, hustling and bustling about, engaged in all sorts of activities. And so, passing through the perimeters of the house and going up to the main building, the man in light blue then turned to the priest and cordially invited him into the house with a hearty, "Please, come in." And then, leading him to a room with a wooden floor, where he had the priest take off his wooden backpack, his conical hat, and his sandals, he then led him over to another well-decorated room and had him take a seat in a comfortable place. Having thus settled, the man in blue, clearly the master of this house, then turned to his servants and said, "First, let's have something to eat." And sending them off, they soon returned with a whole collection of wonderfully delicious-looking dishes of various fish and bird meats. Now, this was a bit of a problem, because according to most iterations of Japanese Buddhism, priests are required to be vegetarians. And so, the priest, instead of immediately indulging in this smorgasbord with everybody else, he merely sat there and politely declined to partake. But seeing this, the host very quickly and amicably asked, "Sir, why aren't you eating?" And the priest replied, "I first became a follower of the Buddha when I was still very young, and since then have never eaten any kind of meat. That is why I am merely watching, my lord." And when the host heard this, He paused for a moment, looking very serious, and with the slightest hint of a threatening tone, he said, "I see. But you know, now that you are in this place, beyond the world you used to know, it won't be good to have you not eat. Furthermore, I have an only daughter whom I love dearly, who has gotten on in years, and I intend to give her to you as a wife. As such, from this day on, I request that you grow your hair out again, and once more become a layman. There is no way for you to go back to where you came from, and so it would behoove you to live as one of us now." Now, as this priest listened to this refrain, and to the understated threat, it terrified him. And now the priest determined that if he didn't do as his host liked, he might very well find himself dead. But with no way of evading the situation he found himself in, the priest nervously responded with, forgive me, my lord. I was just so stunned by and unused to everything that's happened that I misspoke. I will do as you command." At this, the host then smiled, and together he and his guest partook of the various meats that had been prepared. All the while, the priest worried to himself about what the Buddha must be thinking about him. And so, the evening wore on, and soon it became dark. And soon after the rather tense dinner, the host disappeared, and then quickly returned, leading a young girl who looked to be about 20 years old, who was extremely beautiful, and wearing some very fine clothing. The host, practically pushing this girl into the priest's arms, explained, "Here, from this day forward, please love this woman with the same care and diligence that I have for her. She is my one and only daughter. You can imagine how much she means to me." Now, the priest, once again, was not exactly thrilled to be breaking yet another Buddhist vow he had taken, that of celibacy. But with no other option, he obeyed his host's requests, and that night, he made her his wife, if you know what I mean. And so, a new status quo was set, and the priest now spent his days living as an ordinary layman, enjoying married life, wearing all kinds of extravagant soft clothing, indulging in all kinds of delectable foods, and soon his appearance changed completely. He became thick, with 2 C's, as the kids say. His hair grew long and luscious, though as per the culture he tied it up and kept it under an eboshi hat. And he took on a very regal, high-class visage. And he was such a good-natured man that his wife soon became very loving toward him and found the prospect of parting him for any reason an extremely sad affair. The now former priest also returned her love and treated her with all of the affection and devotion he could muster. And so the days and the months passed by until soon the 8th month arrived. I'm not exactly sure what month he arrived in this place. The text implies that there were several months that had passed. However, I think that is where I'm going to end this story. There is a lot more to get through, so this is going to be a multi-part. I am planning on making it 3 parts. So, with all of everything being set up, you will just have to see what happens to this man, what kind of life he lives, and when and where exactly everything takes a turn for the worse. Because things are not going to be so good. Because as you can imagine, a hidden village out in the middle of nowhere that nobody knows about, with everybody living in perfect harmony, well, that's just reeks of some sort of intrigue underneath the surface, some sort of terrible, terrible secret that the village holds. And you will see what that secret is in a later video. But for now, we are going to end it there. So if you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to give the video a like. Please subscribe to the channel so you can be aware of when the next parts to this story, because there are going to be at least 2 more that come out in the future. And if you want to be aware of when those come out, again, please subscribe to the channel. And go ahead and tell me what you think you would do were you in this situation. If you had stumbled across a hidden village in the mountains and all of a sudden were being pressured into living a carefree life, what would you do? Would you think something was wrong? Would you try to escape? Or would you simply take everything as it came? Anyway, if you've been watching all the way up to the end here, I thank you sincerely. Ito katajike no koso haberi kere, and hopefully we will see you for part 2 of the continuation of this story. Thanks again. We'll see you later. Goodbye.